Good evening, dear applicants. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the final online meetup of HSE Banking Institute in 2026. And also I want to remind you that this project provides benefits to both financial analysts and finance program applicants. So we look forward to welcoming you as our students as well. And as always, we'll start with the lecture today, and then we'll answer your questions both about the lecture topic and the project itself. So today's speaker is Alexander Kudrin, who is the chief strategist of ATON company and professor of HSE Banking Institute. And today he will tell you about the OFZs and its new reality. So Alexander Alexandrovich, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Margarita, for the introduction, and I would like to introduce myself one more time. So my name is Alexander Kudrin. I am professor for Banking Institute. So I joined the team back in 2018. So now I'm already 8 years here. So it's a really great experience, and I will be more than pleased to continue the cooperation. And also, it's a big fun to be here, and it's a big pleasure to share my experience with the students, and I hope that this experience will be useful for them. And today I decided to so it was like a choice for me. So which theme to offer to you for the discussion, and today I decided to stick to the OFZ market, which is the biggest growing market in Russia. And so of course it's very interesting to follow the development of this segment, and also for your understanding, if we just look at the landscape of Russian financial market, it turns out that exactly OFZ is the most important part of this landscape. And let me share my screen with you. Okay. So as I said, we are going to discuss a little bit OFZ market. So the presentation will take probably 25 or 30 minutes, and also in the very end it will be like themes for the potential research, which can be conducted by you guys. So if you wish to to try all your best, and also probably to get some benefits from the Banking Institute, and also it will be like an opportunity to ask the questions. So you can leave your questions in the chat, or ask the questions verbally, but all the questions will be replied after the completion of the presentation. Okay, let's start. So I do believe that many of you are familiar with the basics of the government financials, and I do believe that you know that there are revenues and expenditures in the federal budget, and if expenditures are higher than revenues, budget is running deficit. So Russia during the last several years is running deficit, and likely to continue to run the deficit in the incoming years. Is it a problem? The answer is no. This is the most typical situation for all the governments globally, because in general, government is trying to develop various parts of the infrastructure, so to stimulate some parts of the economy, to resolve a lot of social problems, and the resolution of the social problems is probably the main target of the government. And of course, government need money, and this money will be redeemed with the help of the future revenues, and hence the government bond market is one of the key component of the financial market globally. And if you're looking at this slide, well, it turns out that Russian deficit, and also for your understanding, the deficit is measured in two ways, either in nominal terms. So in our practical case, this is like a trillion of rubles, or in percentage of GDP, and this is more unified form of comparison of budget deficit in various countries. And if you look at this chart, it turns out that the forecast for the budget deficit for next 3 years was very, very moderate. But of course, reality is a little bit different. So, and if you look at this chart, which demonstrate the accumulated budget deficit since the beginning of the year, it turns out that this year budget deficit is significantly higher than it was planned initially. So for your understanding, the annual plan for budget deficit was set at the level of 3.8 trillion of rubles. However, currently for the first 4 months of the year, so the budget deficit is close to 6 trillion of rubles, so 2 trillion higher than expected. Why is it so? The explanation is very simple. So there are there were some problems with the oil and gas revenues in the beginning of the year because of sanctions, because of low oil price, and of course the economic growth in Russia is not so strong as was expected last year when the budget was created, was designed, and of course lack of economic growth leads to the small amount of taxation base, which leads to the wider budget deficit. And what does it mean? That government need to find some sources of the financing of the budget deficit. And traditionally, so if we're talking about Russia, so there are several ways how the budget deficit may be financed within the year. Why I'm talking about the operations within the year? Because of course there is one very specific step, but very well known step, like increase of tax burden, increase of taxation. But usually this step is done only since January the 1st of certain year. So and within the year. Increase of taxation is not typical thing. However, during last several years, we saw some examples of such steps. For example, in 2022, the mineral extraction tax, especially for Gazprom, was increased, and the similar was done in 2023. But if you're talking about more or less market-oriented sources of the financing, we can skip this method outside the equation. And also here we are not talking about financing of the budget deficit, we are talking about increase of revenues. I mean, when we're talking about the increase of taxation. But when we are talking about the financing of the budget deficit, so there are several things which can be used. So the first one is usage of so-called national wealth fund. So and it's not CBR reserves, but it's part of reserves, but not included into reserves. And this is money which government stored in the special fund and collected during previous years because of high oil price. The next option is so-called privatization. So government can sell some state-owned property or state-owned companies to raise a certain amount of the money. Donations is also a potential way how to deal with the situation, but it's not so typical. From time to time, certain examples of donations are appeared, but the main way of the financing is usually borrowings. Borrowings includes loans and bonds, and also bonds can be split into two groups: the external, so-called sovereign euro bonds, usually nominated in hard currency, and domestic. And here we have set of different type of bonds: fixed rate, floating rate, CPI linker, and I will tell a little bit more in details about these papers later. So, and if you look at this chart, it shows that since 2019 until 2025, so government was actively used the National Wealth Fund for the financing of the budget deficit. It was observed in 2022, 2023, and 2024. So these blue bars, which are going into negative zone, and also on that, and the part of that, government was actively borrowing money on OFZ market. What has been changed in 2025? It was a certain evolution of the thinking on the side of the authorities, and in the end of the day, they decided not to touch national wealth fund at all, and also to stick and to cover all the deficits with the help of the borrowings. And this approach will be used this year, and most likely will be used in coming a couple of years. Why is it so? The explanation is quite simple. If you look at this chart, here we have the dynamic of the amount of money in national wealth fund. The orange line shows this amount in percentage point of GDP. And blue line in nominal terms in US dollars. And here at this chart we have only those part of national wealth fund which link to the so-called liquid assets. So because these assets can be used for the coverage of the budget deficit. Because technically, national wealth fund can be split into two parts. The first part is liquid assets. More exactly, it's Chinese yuan or gold, and also some investments into some shares, some bonds, etc., etc. These assets are not liquid, and they cannot be used by the government to cover the budget deficit. And if you look at the chart, it turns out that the overall amount of liquid assets in national wealth fund currently is close to 2% of GDP, and it's a low figure. And government decided not to spend money, but try to accumulate. And also it means that national wealth fund aren't likely to be used for the coverage of the budget deficit in coming years. And what about the debt? So as you remember, I mentioned that there are two categories of debt: external debt and domestic debt. And unfortunately, external debt is out of the game because international investors are not permitted to buy Russian debt because of sanctions. So they are not permitted to buy not only Russian debt, but also Russian equities or any other Russian assets. And hence, the external debt is more or less stable. At this chart, you can see that this debt is demonstrated by orange bars, so which more or less stable during last several years. While domestic debt is actively growing, and when we're talking about and also another very important point that when we're talking about the growth of the debt, it needs to take into account that the amount of the debt is still very moderate. The gray line at the chart shows the total debt to GDP ratio, and according to the official projections, even in 2028 it will be below 20% of GDP. For your understanding, in the United States, the amount of the government debt to GDP is about 120%. In Japan, it's more than 200%. So hence, Russia is running a very small amount of the government debt, and this is definitely a big advantage in the current situation. But on the other hand, the amount of the OFZ issuance, the amount of the borrowings on the domestic market are steadily growing. And if you look at the year 2025, so it was like record high amount of the borrowings, more than 7 trillion of rubles. This year projection, the current projection is more moderate, but realistically, we do believe that it will be a wider budget deficit, as I explained earlier, and hence the amount of issuance this year will be also close to 7 trillion of rubles, or probably even slightly more. So, and what are the current problem of the government debt? So, of course, we have sanctions and geopolitical situation which influence all the categories of financial markets in Russia. We have Russian market, which is definitely isolated from the external world, and also the assets of the international investors are frozen. And this is a problem because, for example, in 2021, so the amount of the share of international investors on the domestic bond market, on OFZ market, was close to 25%. And of course, for the government, it will be quite comfortable thing to place ruble debt, place OFZs, not only in favor of local investors, but also in favor of international investors. And of course, international investors are definitely have certain advantage in comparison to the domestic investors because these players are running relatively long-term funds, and they were more focused on the purchasing of the long-term bonds rather than short-term bonds, which is also more comfortable to any borrower. Another problem is a purely economic one. It's like extremely high interest rate, which leads to the high amount of the expenditures for the service of government debt. The situation with the budget deficit is unclear, and it means that the overall amount of the issuance is unclear. And as I said, there are very high chances that this amount will be increased this year in comparison to the budgeted, which also not a comfortable situation for the investors. Fragmented demand from the local investors because we have the fundamental problem. We have lack of institutional investors domestically, and we have definitely a lack of long-term money, which also a problem for the development of the market, and of course the instability of the forex market, which is traditionally one of the key indicator for domestic investors. When we are talking about interest rates and high interest rates, so the source of these rates is definitely monetary policy of Russian Central Bank. As you probably know, Russian Central Bank is fighting with inflation, and due to this, within this process, it increased the key rate, the policy rate, to 21%. It was in the end of 24. Since the rate started to decrease, but still it's extremely high. Just for your understanding, if you look at this chart, it turns out that before 2023, so the interest rate in Russia, the policy rate in Russia was higher than 15%, only 2 times in 2015 and 2022 for the very short-term period of time, and also it was like in 22 and in 2015 it was a reaction on the sharp financial crisis. This time situation is different, and I would say that high interest rates is some kind of the new economic reality, and of course it's the target of CBR is quite clear, to keep the inflation under control. But on the other hand, if you're talking about financial market, of course it's an unusual situation, and of course the cost of funding, the cost of debt for all categories of borrowers, for the government, for the corporates, for the banks, is extremely high. And so from time to time it leads to problems in the corporate sector. I mean, some kind of the defaults, etc. While on the level of the government, it leads to the higher expenditures for the debt service. Because if you remember the chart with the amount of issuance and the chart with the amount of the debt is growing, and the interest rates are growing, and also as a result, the amount of the of the money which are spent for the debt service is steadily growing. So, for example, until 2023, this amount was lower than 1% of GDP on the annual basis, and currently it's about 1.6% of GDP. Is it big or not? Just for your understanding, in the United States, the amount of the expenditures for the debt service on the annual basis is close to 4%. So Russia is staying in the comfortable situation, but unfortunately the interest rates are still very high, which also means that the cost of funding is definitely high. So, and if I'm talking about the structure of the holders of OFZ, it's quite an important thing. So to understand how this market works, and also I will give some more color regarding the recent development on this market. So here we need to remember about the following things. So the key players on this market are commercial banks. So their share on this market is about 61%. And of course, it's not a big surprise, because in Russia the financial system was developed mainly based on the commercial banking. And also, it's not a big surprise that commercial banks are the most active players among all the financial institutions. The key problem for the commercial banks in terms of their investments into bonds and into government bonds, that these institutions are running relatively short-term funds. So the average length or the average maturity of deposit is approximately 1.8 years, while the bonds which are offered by the finance ministry on the market are significantly longer in terms of maturity. It's like from 5 to 15 years. And of course, if bank is purchasing the paper with the fixed rate and maturity, let's say in 10 years, the bank is running a very significant interest rate risk. So, and of course, this situation is not very comfortable for the banks, and hence banks more focusing on the purchasing of the very specific government bonds, so-called floating rate bonds. These bonds are usually linked to RONE interest rate, and also the interest rate is changing in line with the change of RONE interest rate, and RONE interest rate is the overnight rate. So, and it means that the banks which are buying these securities are not running interest rate risk at all. So what I want to say that floating rate bonds is the most comfortable instrument for the commercial banks. So what about others? So foreigners. So currently there are around 3% of foreigners on the domestic market, and the bulk of these bonds are frozen. So, and as I said previously, for example, in 2021, their share was about 21%. Currently, it's significantly lower, and they're not playing any role on this market. The amount of their interest, the ability of foreigners to buy government debt in Russia is close to zero, and of course, amount of activity is very, very low. So two other categories is gray zone and yellow zone, pension funds and insurance companies. This is like typical institutional investors. Usually pension funds and insurance companies are the core buyers of government debt, because they're running long-term assets and they're ready to be invested into long-term securities. The only one problem for Russia is the fact that these type of investors are not very well developed in the country, and hence their share on the market is only 17% in aggregate. And then we have 19%, which is others, so which includes mainly asset management companies, and this is like relatively well, they're not new players on this market, but during the last couple of years, their participation was growing actively, and I would say that they definitely did the biggest difference on the market in 2025. And of course, here when we're talking about asset management companies, so in the end of the day, this is like money of private individuals, which they decided to send to the asset management company to allow professionals to invest this money into various instruments. But this group of investors is probably the most important in the current situation, as well as commercial banks. So as for pension funds, insurance companies, though, their importance is significantly lower. And let us see what was the distribution of demand between banks and non-banks during the last 3 years. If you look at this chart, it shows that amount of, if you look at, for example, 2025, so banks in net terms purchased OFZ worth to approximately 10 trillion of rubles. So while non-banks purchased approximately 6 trillion of rubles, but also here we don't have statistic of the redemption. So I'm sorry, it's not net purchasing, but gross purchasing means without redemption. But also, as I mentioned before, so one of the most comfortable instruments for the investments of commercial banks is floating rate bonds. And if we remove floating rate bonds, the situation looks a little bit different. So For example, last year, non-banks bought approximately 6 trillion of rubles of fixed rate bonds, while commercial banks invested into this category of debt approximately 8 trillion of rubles, and their input is comparable. But if you look at the first 4 months of this year, so the amount of investments by non-banking organization is slightly higher rather than investments of banks. And of course, it's a very important thing, which also help to understand how important are non-banking investors for the OFZ market. And one of the most popular questions on the market, which various investors are asking is very simple. If floaters are very comfortable for the commercial banks, why the government is not issuing the floaters instead of fixed rate bonds? And also because it's very easy to find the demand on floating rate bonds in the banking sector, and of course it may help to resolve all the problems of the federal budget. The answer is very simple. So unfortunately, the cost of service of floating rate bonds depends on the level of the key rate. So, and if key rate is growing, the cost of service of this category of debt is also growing. And according to the overall approach of the finance ministry, they prefer to have not more than 25% of the floaters in the structure of the debt. If you look at the chart, it turns out that currently the share is significantly high, is 34% of the debt. And of course, what the government would prefer to do this year, also to avoid the situation with the issuance of floating rate bonds, and also to stick to the issuance of fixed rate bonds. So, and what are the reasons for the investors currently this year in 2026 to be invested into fixed rate bonds? So the most obvious answer is, of course, the rate cut cycle, which is conducted right now by the central bank. So if you remember, this year was started with the policy rate at the level of 16%. Currently, it's 14.5, and according to my estimation, close to the year end, the policy rate will be approximately 12%. And of course, if the key rate is moving down, the yield for OFZ is moving down as well, and it brings significant income to the holders of this category of bonds. And of course, this assumption is considered by many investors as very good reason to increase the exposure on OFZ, and also a lot of non-banking investors, as was demonstrated on the previous charts, were actively purchased government bonds last year, this year, and also had helped to the financial ministry to execute the borrowing program. And of course, once the rate cut cycle is over, it will be much more complicated task for the authorities to issue fixed rate bonds in the huge amount. And of course, there are a lot of challenges for the authorities in the current environment. And if I'm talking about year 2026, I would like to indicate probably 3 questions or challenges, and also after that I will formulate 3 themes for potential research. So the first one is, of course, if you're looking for the investment into government bonds, you need to understand what will be the yield of the bonds in the, let's say, in the end of the year, because with the help of this information, you will be able to calculate your potential profit. So, and if you look at this chart shows what. This chart demonstrates the dynamics of the yield of 10-year OFZ, and currently it trades close to the level of 14.7. And the first question: what will be the level of these bonds in the end of the year? Because it's important for both investors and for the finance ministry as well, because the level of yield defines the cost of funding for the ministry. The second question is what will be the slope of the curve? So here at this chart, I'm very sorry for the legend, which is in Russian. So at this chart, you can show you can see the spread between yield of 10-year OFZ versus RONE overnight rate, and currently the spread is approximately 10 basis points, and also it means that the yield for the longer term instruments is higher than like yield for the overnight rate, higher than overnight rate. And another question, so if you try to understand which instruments are better to be invested, even if you believe into the compression of the yield curve, you need to understand what will be the slope of the curve, because the slope will tell you about the pace of contraction of yield in various parts of the yield curve. And this is the second big question. So the overall, the theory tells us that if the slope is positive, and if it's like close to probably 150 or 200 basis points, this premium will be enough to make longer term bonds with the fixed rate interesting for the commercial banks, because the cost of funding for the commercial banks usually is below rather than RONE, and if the premium is about 200 basis points, so they can make like quite a good profit while investing into these bonds. This is the second question: what will be the slope? The third question, what will be the amount of the issuance? And here I decided to repeat the chart with the budget deficit, so the accumulated budget deficit since the beginning of the year. And here we have like more complicated questions. So at first we need to understand what will be the budget deficit for this year, then to understand what are the additional source of funding apart from issuance OFZ, and then to understand what will be the issuance of what will be the amount of issuance of OFZ, because it's also critically important to understand the situation of the market. And as a result, we are coming to the three themes for research. The first one, as I said, what will be the yield of 10-year OFZ in the end of 2026 if we operate with the macroeconomic forecast by the central bank. So this is like a very important thing, because we have different forecasts. So we have, for example, a forecast from the economics ministry, we have a forecast from the CBR, but in this particular theme, I would suggest to use the forecast from the CBR. And of course, you need to explain why the yield will be there. The second question, what will be the slope of OFZ curve in the end of 2026? And the additional question here, which quite an important for the answer to the first one, is what will be the total demand for OFZ from non-banking institutions in 2026? So it's quite a challenging task, because it requires some kind of the analysis of the overall amount under the management for asset management companies, for pension funds, for the insurance companies, etc. And the third question, so what will be the amount of issuance of OFZ in 2026 given the current execution of the budget? So as you saw, the aggregated amount of the budget deficit for the first 4 months was approximately 6 trillion of rubles, and of course, as I said, it needs to understand what will be the final figure, what will be like additional source, and then to come to the conclusion what will be the amount of the issues. And of course, additional questions here: what will be the structure of the issuance? So I mean, we can stick to the very simplistic approach. So what will be the percentage of fixed rate bonds, and what will be the percentage of floating rate bonds? So to remind, so the key priority of the finance ministry to place like 100% in fixed rate bonds. And of course, you need to explain why do you think so. So as far as I remember, the term for the potential research is approximately a month, and you can send this your research to Banking Institute, and I do believe that Margarita will provide some additional comments in the end. But currently, we have several questions, and I will probably try to answer the questions, and then we will go to the details of the research. So little bit strange question regarding about some statements of Russian president on May during the Victory Days. I don't think that there is any direct link between these statements and the budget deficit this year. So the amount of military expenditures is definitely high, and it's very well known. You can find all the statistics on the website of the finance ministry. So and the growing budget deficit in the beginning of the year is more in my view, is more like a function of the idea of the authorities that the economic growth needs to be stimulated somehow. So, and I think that some results are already observed. So, if you look at the statistics of GDP, it was contraction in January and February and acceleration and growth in May. So the next question regarding the forecast of the interest rate in the end of 2026. So I believe that the question about policy rate or the key rate. So the forecast is 12% for the year end of 2026. So and currently it's a little bit I would say optimistic part of market consensus. So and guys, if you have any more questions, you can use our chat to ask them.
Okay, if there are no questions left, I will tell some words about your future pieces of the research. So as usual, please send your works to either my email, I will type it in the chat, or to the email of HSE Banking Institute. And the deadline will appear tomorrow at the website of the project. And also we will share it in the letter, in our usual letter with the presentation and themes for research and so on. So I think it will be tomorrow as well. You will receive it tomorrow. So we have some more questions.
Yes. So the question about the usage of any software packages for the making forecast. Well, we have our own models who are mainly based on Excel, and of course we use some packages, but not very actively. So what are the forecast for the gold price in future? Well, I'm the specialist in in commodities markets. So, but also if you're talking about gold, so I can express my personal view, which is very very amateur. But the view is the following. So, well, given the situation in the Middle East, so the price of oil is definitely very high and definitely influence the inflation. So inflation is accelerating. So in this situation, usually gold is performing better than many other assets. So what the problem of the current situation in the market is the fact that central banks, which were many central banks, not all of them, but many of them, which were previously buying gold, currently are selling. But it's in my view, it's a temporary effect, and I believe that the gold market will be strong. Another question regarding usage of AI in your work. Yes, of course. So we definitely use AI. So, for example, for the as a good alternative to the Google search, also for the creation of some kind of the base things. But you know that we are not looking for the creation of the full-fledged research based only on the AI, because the quality of this research is definitely not ideal, but even probably even more bad rather than good. So, and of course, another thing which is critically important, that you need to have very good skills for the good revision of these results to be sure that the result is not ridiculous. So. Margarita, so two questions to you. How to get maximum score for this task?
I just put the wrong button, sorry. Okay, about the maximum score, Ilya, do you mean the criteria for this task about the research? Or do you mean the project as a whole? So how to become the winner of the project, or criteria about the criteria for this task? Alexander Alexandrovich, do we have criteria?
So, we don't have any formal criteria because it's quite I would say not a formal approach, but what is expected from the candidate to build certain model, to use relevant sources of information, and also to conduct an analysis and clearly answer to the questions which was posted. So these three, and then we will check all the research papers, and then to make certain evaluation of them.
Okay,
and also there is question from Maria Rashkova. When are we getting the final task?
Okay, the final task, I believe you mean the final review of the project. You'll get an email about this final task, about the criteria and so on. I think during next week. I believe it will be probably Tuesday, but it's not 100%, but definitely during the next week. So please wait for it. Okay, do you have any more questions? Not yet. So if there are no questions left, I think we can finish here. So Alexander Alexandrovich, thank you so much for the lecture. Thank you all our dear applicants for visiting this lecture and for participating in the project. I believe that it was a useful experience for you, and I believe that we will meet many of you in during admission period, both admission period and during the study period, as our students, of our programs, Financial Analyst and Master of Finance. So let's finish here. Goodbye.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.